Hospital Porter's Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapanwo TV, and welcome to this. It's this Watch Read Party review, which I've been promising you for a while. We did the introduction, if you remember, of how long ago was that? I think it was just after the New Year. And I said because this is Watch and Read Party, I would leave a little bit more time between when I did the introduction and when I did the review. Because, of course, the introduction is actually like when I just introduce the subject. I don't go into it in any detail. I introduce the actual thing we're going to watch or read, and then I say to people, well, go away and watch it or read it now. Obviously, watching a film, it takes less time to arrange the watching of a movie than it does to read an entire book, especially when it's quite a long book like this one. And of course, the subject matter of this particular Watch Read Party is this book, which is Inferno by Dan Brown, and of course the film which was adapted from it, which you can see. I'll just show you a shot of that in the intro. I actually went and looked for a DVD of it, and they were a bit too expensive, so I decided. So basically, I just did I watched it on a streaming service for a much cheaper price. I didn't want to go and get myself a DVD of it simply because I didn't think the film was really worth keeping. It's not the sort of thing I want to watch again. Just like this is probably a book I won't read more than once. As you can see here, I've made some notifications. These little dots here mean that's where I've marked pages. So we're going to go into that in a little while. But first of all, as a general overview, I could say that this book, Inferno, is actually very typical of Dan Brown. It's the fourth Dan Brown book I've read, and it's really not that much different from the others. I mean, it reminds me especially of the Da Vinci Code, which is really Brown's most famous book. It's the one that really made him a writing superstar. And it's also the best of his books, in my view. This has a lot in common with the Da Vinci Code, in a sense, and I think I brought this up in the introduction, but I will repeat this. It's very American, in the sense it's set in Europe, and it's kind of partly a touristy. It's almost like it's partly a piece of travel writing. So, although it's a thriller, and it's a very tense, very fast-paced thriller, everything that happens in the book takes place within a single day. Despite the fact that it is a very tense, fast-paced thriller, it's also, as I say, a piece of travel writing. It's kind of like, I think, how Americans see Europe as a place they're very interested in. It has a lot of history, a much longer history than their own continent. But there is a kind of like a do Europe in 5 days kind of package mentality to the way Americans see Europe. I mean, Americans are hilarious when they're over in Europe. I mean, I can only speak really for my own country. I did see some American tourists in France once, and they were just like walking around, talking to everyone in English, assuming everyone speaks English. My French teacher. I was on a school trip, and my French teacher was really annoyed by this, saying it was so rude that they just assume everyone speaks English. And in France, I mean, in some countries they do. I mean, in Denmark they did, if you remember, but in France they didn't. But you get some strange, things. I kid you not, right? An American once came up to me in Oxford and they asked me the way to Itchycoo Park. Obviously, they've heard the very famous song by Small Faces, Itchycoo Park, which is actually it's a song about Oxford. If you listen to the lyrics, but I had to explain to her, Itchycoo Park actually doesn't exist. A lot of Americans also want to find Jordan College. Jordan College also doesn't exist. Jordan College in Oxford is imaginary. It's from The Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, and actually does not exist in real life. It's based on Exeter College, where Pullman was a student, and he used to climb out onto the roof from his window in his bedroom, like Lyra does in the story, if you've read those books. Anyway, don't want to digress too much. So this is basically about, it's typical of, like I said, Dan Brown. It's set in a historical European location, in this case Florence. His previous book, as you know, the Da Vinci Code was set in Paris and London, and Angels and Demons was set in Rome. and it's packed with all kinds of information. It's almost like little interludes every so often in the text where he gives you a bit of the history behind the place where they're in, and he goes into it in great detail. I mean, if people were really, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, if people were really in the character situation, that is Robert Langdon and Sienna Brooks, the two main characters in the first part of the book. I mean, there's several acts in this book. The second act is different. It's actually the second part of the book I want to go into more because it's much more interesting. But it's actually the second part of the book which is far more interesting. But in the first part of the book, you have like you go for if you were really in the situation that these characters are in, because they're basically running. I mean, it starts in a hospital where Robert Langdon wakes up and he finds he's got like about a week's missing time. He's got amnesia and he doesn't understand why he's in Florence. Last thing he remembered was being back at home in the United States, at his home in Harvard or wherever it is. I can't remember where it is he actually is based. As I said, I actually read this book a few months ago, but I have reread bits of it, but not the entire thing. I'm not going to reread the entire thing. I watched the film as well. When he finds himself in this hospital, dazed, drugged up, he doesn't know what the hell's going on. He's got a head injury. And then this woman, Sienna, comes. But basically, these people trying to hunt him down. It's like two teams of people are trying to hunt him down. One of them is this crazy spiky-haired woman on a motorbike called Vientha. And the other is this team of pinstriped wearing suited thugs that work for something called the Consortium. And it's all a big mystery about exactly what's going on. Then you find out that the World Health Organization is trying to find him as well. This is, I suppose, something that you people who are very conspiratorially minded, a bit like me, are going to notice. Is the World Health Organization is like the hero in this, and you get this a lot. For example, in Angels and Demons, the Vatican is like heroic, and things like that. And there's also a mention of the Council on Foreign Relations in this particular novel. And that is actually something. That is a criticism I made of World War Z. If you remember my review of World War Z. Again, WHO is the hero. You know, who is the hero? That's right, who? Yeah, and so in this case, there's the WHO is like trying to save the world. It's basically this is like a. I'll go into the details of what this actually means, but the WHO is actually trying to save the world from some horrible monster virus. When of course, I can't say too much on YouTube, but of course in reality it's the other way round. But anyway, he's like on the run from these various people. He's on the run from these various people, and he and every so often there's this like interlude where they talk about the history of the place they're going as they're fleeing through this Florence, which Florence is a beautiful place with so much history in terms of art and literature. The central theme of Inferno is Dante Alighieri, famous 13th century poet. That's his face. There's actually a death mask of him in a museum in Florence, which is actually used. They basically, when he died, they put like a plaster cast over his face, made a mask, and this actually is a major part of the story. But as you know, and there's the Duomo in as you see at the bottom, this famous Duomo, this famous cathedral in Florence. So there was a lot of art and history and things like that in Florence. It's absolutely true. I'm not using my glasses, by the way, to read the book. I found that using my reading glasses is best for the screen and for the computer screen, but it's not much good actually when it comes to my to reading actual written text. So yeah, Inferno, of course, is one of the three. I think they're called cantos. No, there's not the cantos. The three sections of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. This is it's an epic poem about a man who, as I explained in the introduction, finds himself in a situation where he goes through the various places of the afterlife. It's an exploration of the afterlife, and of course Dante also comes up again in What Dreams May Come, because I think the Divine Comedy is heavily influenced the author of that book and the film, especially the filmmaker as well. And when we do the review and live stream watch parties for that book as well, and that film, What Dreams May Come, I will also bring up Dante there, because the art and the imagery of Dante's Divine Comedy has influenced a lot of our vision of heaven and hell. Indeed, the church has adopted a lot of it too. And Inferno is the first part where Dante descends into hell, and he goes through the various levels of hell. It's a very complicated situation. I mean, it's not really relevant to the theme that I want to discuss in this particular book. But the Inferno in the Divine Comedy, the Dante himself is like this overriding theme of this particular book. It's like the obsessive symbolism that keeps coming up again and again, especially the main antagonist, the central bad guy called Bertrand Zobrist. Although in Dan Brown's stories, there's always, like, one thing that's typical about Dan Brown is you have, I'm just trying to get my notes right, is people have the characters in Dan Brown's stories, the people who interact with the main central protagonist, who's called Robert Langdon, they always sort of seem to have confused loyalties, and very often one person you think is good will turn out to be bad, or vice versa. And very often it is for reasons that are not always made clear. In the case of Lee Teabing in the Da Vinci Code, I could not quite gather, because of course he turns out to be someone people very different to who you think he is to begin with, a very different kind of character, and it's not always made clear exactly why. And in the case of Lee Teabing, it's not quite. I never completely understood why he became what he was. I never quite grasped his transformation and his motivations. In the same way, well, again, there's going to be spoilers in this. Sienna Brooks is another of these characters. I think it's explained far better the way Sienna has her change of heart. But what you find is what soon comes out, and it's actually talked about. It's actually described first. It's actually described first in a second. This is told in the third person. It's actually described in a second, third person. There's a second, third person position. And this is on this group called the Consortium, who sent Viantha. Again, as with the Silas, the strange, weird albino monk from Da Vinci Code, you have you have very active secondary antagonists. Usually they're working on orders of someone else, but they have like a very complicated backstory or something strange about them, something unusual. In this case, this is a woman called Viantha who has like blonde spiky hair. This is not reproduced in the film, I should point out, which has kind of blonde spiky hair, and she's working for something called the Consortium, who you first think are after Robert Langdon, then it all changes and it's like different. But there's this guy comes across one of the crew on this ship, which is run by the Consortium. What happens is this guy called Bertrand Zobrist employs the Consortium, which is kind of like a do anything for the right price kind of semi-legal group, to distribute a film that he's made. Now he's made, and it's described like this. Where is it? How's the description go? I'm just going to go through all this. There's this guy who works on the ship. He brings it to the attention of the captain. So I thought I'd made proper notes here. Oh, well, excuse me if my notes are not perfect. But anyway, what happens is this guy Zobrist, who's a genetic scientist, he's a genetic engineer, a famous biological superstar pop scientist. He has created a video and he wants the Consortium, says at this particular date, at this particular time, you've got to release this to all the world's media, and it's very spooky. And I'll describe it. As I said, I'm going to read some passages from this book, and it's all fair use, I think. Immediately, his screen faded. He decides to review this video. This operative on board this ship run by the consortium, which is their floating headquarters. It's all very James Bond. They have like a ship with a secret compartment, and you get like this laboratory with all these people around computer screens, that sort of thing, And the leader, they called him the provost. He sits in his office in the captain's chair and things like that. Yeah, very James Bond. Knowlton he says, now ensconced in his private space. Here we go. He flipped a switch on the wall of his cubicle. For privacy, all the glass-walled offices aboard the Mendacium were built with a suspended... Okay, it talks about how he basically puts these screens across the cubicle. Compartmentalization was the cornerstone of the consortium's success. Know only your own mission, share nothing. My goodness me, this guy should be working for the NHS. Now ensconced in his private space, Knowlton inserted the memory stick into his computer and clicked the file to begin his assessment. This is the file they're planning to upload to key media people the following morning. Immediately, the screen faded to black, and his speakers began playing the soft sound of lapping water. An image slowly appeared on the screen, amorphous and shadowy, emerging from the darkness. A scene began to take shape, the interior of a cave or a giant chamber of some sort. The floor of the cavern was water, like an underground lake. Strangely, the water appeared to be illuminated as if from within. The lapping... It's an eerie reddish hue. Pale walls are washed with tendril-like reflections from the rippling water. It's great, very atmospheric description. As the lapping continued, the camera began to tilt downward and descend vertically directly towards the water, until the camera pierced the illuminated surface. The sound of rippling disappeared, replaced by an eerie hush beneath the water. Submerged, the camera kept descending, and it focused on the cavern's silt-covered floor. Bolted to the floor was a rectangular plaque of shimmering titanium. The plaque bore an inscription: "In this place, on this date, the world changed forever." And there's the name, and the name was that of their client engraved on this plaque, and the date was tomorrow. Right, he goes into some more details about this. Here we go. Because this is what he sees here. Here we go. Below decks on the luxury vessel the Mendacium, facilitator Lawrence Knowlton sat in his seated glass cubicle and stared in disbelief at his computer monitor, having just previewed the video from their client had left behind. Am I supposed to upload this to the media tomorrow morning? He says here, we follow through, no questions asked, no matter what. But the prospect of uploading this video left Knowlton unsettled. This video was baffling. Something felt different, very different. He sat back down on his computer and restarted the video file, hoping a second viewing might shed more light. He turned up the volume and settled in for the 9-minute show. And again, he describes how you get this plaque, the world changed in this place, on this date, the world changed forever. Signed by the consortium's client is Bertrand Zobrist. This is not revealed at the time. The camera then panned left, revealing a startling object hovering underwater just beside the plaque. Tethered to the floor by a short filament was an undulating sphere of thin plastic, delicate and wobbling like an oversized soap bubble. That transparent shape floated like an underwater balloon, inflated not with helium but with some kind of gelatinous yellow-brown liquid. It's red liquid in the film. I think red is a better colour for this sort of thing. The amorphous bag was distended and appeared to be about a foot in diameter. Within its transparent walls, the murky cloud of liquid seemed to swirl slowly, like the eye of a silently glowing storm. Jesus, Knowlton thought, feeling clammy. Slowly, then the image faded to black. A new image appeared on the cavern's damp wall, dancing with rippling reflections on the illuminated lagoon. On the wall a shadow appeared, the shadow of a man standing in the cavern, but the man's head was misshapen badly. Instead of a nose, the man had a long beak. It was as if he were half bird. He was dressed as a medieval plague doctor. Knowlton sat, and when he spoke his voice was muffled, but he spoke with an eerie eloquence, measured cadence, as if he were the narrator of some kind of classical chorus. He said, "I am the Shade. If you're watching this, then it means my soul is finally at rest. Driven underground, I must speak to the world, from deep within the earth, exiled into this gloomy cavern where the blood-red waters collect in the lagoon that reflects no stars. An underground lake. But it is my paradise, the perfect womb for my fragile child, Inferno. Soon you will all know what I've left behind, and yet even here I sense the footfalls of ignorant souls who pursue me." Here we go. Oops, my notes are acting funny. "Willing to stop nothing to thwart my actions. Forgive them, you might say, for they know not what they do. But here comes the moment in history where ignorance is no longer a forgivable offence. A moment when only wisdom has the power to absolve. With purity of conscience I bequeath to you all the hope and salvation of tomorrow. And yet still there are those who hunt me like a dog, fueled by self..." Oh, someone's... Oh, fucking me. Oh, right, okay. "There's silver-haired beauty who dares to call me monster. The blind clerics who lobbied for the death of Copernicus, that's the church." And this is referring to Dr. Sinsky, the head of the WHO. "I am not a prophet, I am your salvation, I am Shade." And so this is like, he gets really worried, he starts talking to his boss, and his boss thinks he shouldn't say anything. He carries on like this. "There are new dark ages. Centuries ago, Europe was in the depths of its own misery, its population huddled, starving, mired in sin and hopelessness. They were as a congested forest, suffocating dead wood. Culling is God's natural order. And ask yourself, what followed the Black Death? The Renaissance, rebirth." You may guess where this is going. You may guess why I'm interested in this. "Soon as the Inferno smoulders beneath the waters, it is your salvation. It will burst into flames." So, and he's dressed as a medieval plague doctor while he's writing. It's all very Dan Brown, all very sort of theatric. And here we go, right. And it goes on like this. Here we go. I'm just looking through this, yeah. And it talks about how the client had got in touch with him, Zabrist had got in touch with him for this. "The timing will be critical," Zabrist tells the provost. "You must keep it hidden until this day." Yeah. "I want this uploaded to the world's media. The exact date. Shortly after you deliver this video, I'll become a very famous man." What's he planning on? Right. I'm just going through this note. So, there's this bag of some kind of liquid. And you can, in the cover here, you can actually see it bursting. Here we go. Look at this cover here. You can see it. It's like something's bursting out of a bag. That big red plume that comes out of the bag when the bag bursts. But what is it that's in the bag? And it also describes Zabrist's visit to the World Health Organization to meet Dr. Elizabeth Sinsky. Now, Sinsky is one of the characters. She's head of the World Health Organization, but she herself is barren. She had some steroid treatment for asthma to save her life when she was a kid, and it's left her barren. She always wanted to be a mother, and she can't be. And it's the theme of fertility and infertility. You can probably guess where this is going. Little clue, it's just like Utopia. "Dr. Sinsky," the man's sharp voice declared, "thank you for joining me." The man's tautly precise accent suggested Switzerland, because he's Swiss, this guy. "Please sit. I was at your presentation. I came a long distance to hear you." Yeah, right. There we go. Let's go through this. "Pardon my failed attempt of humour." And he shows a picture of the artist Doré depicting Dante's Inferno. And then he does this thing that seems very strange. He says, if I were to take the piece of paper and tear it in two, and then I were to place the two halves on top of each other, and then I were to repeat the process, I produce a stack of paper that is now 4 times the thickness of the original, correct? Hypothetically speaking, if the original sheet of paper is a mere 1/10 of a millimetre thick, and I were to repeat this process, say, 50 times, do you know how tall the stack would be? I do, said Elizabeth. It would be 1/10 of a millimetre times 2 to the 15th power, which is actually quite a lot. 1/10 of a millimetre times 2 to the 15th power. Our stack of paper, after 50 doublings, that's a long, long way, almost the altitude of the sun. Yeah, circles. Yeah, and Elizabeth was not surprised. The staggering power of geometric growth was something she dealt with all the time. Circles of contamination, replications of infected cells, death toll estimates. My point is, said Zabriskie, he's not named yet. Zabrist, sorry. The history of the human population growth is even more dramatic. The Earth's population, like our stack of paper, has meagre beginnings but alarming potential. You probably guess what's happening. He talks about how the Earth's population took thousands of years from the early dawn of man, all the way to the 1800s to reach 1 billion people, but only about 200 years to reach 2 billion in the 1920s, then 50 years to reach 4 billion in the 1970s. It goes on, and he talks about like clean water, deforestation, animal species going extinct, topsoil. It's the usual story. This is actually the typical the people who talk about overpopulation, like James Lovelock, etc., talk about this. Clean water is harder to come by. The WHO, which is the gatekeeper to the planet's help, is investing things like curing diabetes, filling blood banks, battling cancer. So I brought you here to ask you directly, why the hell the WHO does not have the guts to deal with the real issue head on? Yeah, and she defends the WHO then, says, yes, an even bigger army of Catholic ministries. And she says, and he mentions Melinda Gates has barely risked the wrath of her own church by pledging $560 million to help improve birth control around the world. It'll give out condoms and things like that. Yeah. Landfills overflowing with unused condoms to try and reduce fertility, reduce the number of babies, and keep the population down by voluntary means. Sensitive means. Just say, here's some condoms, contraception. Here's the pill. They give that to people in Africa and things like that who can't normally afford them. But then he shows you this. You can see where I've made notes here. That's the world population graph. You'll be familiar with that. All the obsessives talk about that. And you see, as I read this book, I get the feeling that Dan Brown, the author, seems to have a very different attitude in terms of the moral compass of the story. In his other books, it's always very clear whose side he's on, who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, what's right, what's wrong. In this book, it's very different. So, for example, there's a motto at the start, which is often, many books have a motto at the start, my own do. The darkest places in hell are reserved for those who maintain their neutrality in times of moral crisis. And he doesn't say who that quote's by. It's mentioned in the book later. I can't remember who it is. But I get the feeling that Dan Brown is sympathetic to this idea, this fear of overpopulation, and this will come about some more. He talks about human culling, this Zabrist guy. He talks about human culling, the need for... And he says here at the end, any environmental biologist or statistician will tell you that humankind's best chance of long-term survival occurs with a much lower population than we have now. And Elizabeth fires back, we're at 7 billion, we can't lower it, can we? We can't lower it to pre-industrial levels. And the tall man's green eyes flashed fire. Is it too late? So you see, you can probably guess what's going on here. This is very like Utopia. This is a very similar story to Utopia. And you start to get some sense that Sienna Brooks is not who she says she is. Because Langdon finds out that she knows the priest. Let's go through these notes here. There's some more. There's another graph there, which is published in the text. And I mean, I could read this. I actually made the notes here. Here we go. Where's she'd been at the darkened room at the Council of Foreign Relations in New York, listening to the maniacal ravings of the mysterious stranger who summoned her there. Someone needs to fight this war, the figure concluded, or this is our future. Mathematics guarantees it. Mankind is hovering now in a purgatory of procrastination and indecision and personal greed. This is another reference to the Divine Comedy, because there are three segments of the Divine Comedy: Inferno, Purgatory and Paradise. And it says here, but the ring of hell awaits just beneath our feet. Elizabeth was still reeling from the monstrous ideas the man had laid out. What you're suggesting is the only remaining option. Actually, she replied, I was going to say criminal. The man shrugged. The path to paradise passes directly through hell. Dante has taught us that. You're mad. Mad? The man repeated, sounding hurt. Me? I think not. Madness is the who staring into the abyss and denying it is there. Madness is an ostrich who sticks her head in the sand while the pack of hyenas closes around her. And so he shows that graph about, again, CO2, species extinction, ozone depletion, consumption of the ocean resources, fish stocks, ocean life, topsoil, etc., etc. Over the last 50 years, the man said, our sins against Mother Nature. That's another. Penty Linkler talks about eco-sins. Our sins against Mother Nature have grown exponentially. I fear for the soul of humankind when the WHO publishes the graph. The world's politicians and power brokers and environmentalists held emergency summits. The outcome: privately they put their hands in their hands and wept. Publicly they assured us they were working on the solutions to the complex issues. The issues are complex, said Elizabeth. Bullshit, the man erupted. You know damn well the graph depicts the simplest of relationships, a function based on a single variable: global population. And he goes, and they have this debate about, which you're probably familiar with, which I've actually reproduced. And I'll tell you my own position on this in a minute. So what he wants the WHO to do is to take action. He wants to take action against he wants to take action to reduce the human population. Indeed, I don't think Dan Brown is like an insider, because these ideas, the ideas you read about in this book, are not really very controversial. There's many people, as I said, James Lovelock, Guy McPherson, these people are all saying this. They're all saying, they sometimes say things like, there are too many people in the world. Wouldn't it just be easier if we had a few more people? And I also remind you, and I'll put a link in the description box if I can remember, to my video about Utopia. I can't even remember which video it is now, but I'll go through because he says the same thing. Kevin Christie, this character, Kevin Christie, if you remember that scene where he's telling them, we human beings and things like that. They did, it's like a virus on the earth. And then it just describes that they simply, Sienna and then Lauren Robert are then fleeing. I mean, Sienna is not who you think she is, though. And it talks about Bertrand Zabriskie. This is the guy who wants depopulation. Famous biochemist, made a fortune on biological patents at a young age. Invented the field of germline manipulation. There's a bit of science fiction in this. Well, it's not so science fiction, actually. because this book was written in 2013, and he talks about something called vector viruses. Since then, we've had I can't actually say it on YouTube, but since then we've had biological agents which are used as medical treatments, which are supposedly function like vaccines, which do what these vector viruses do. So I'll say that much. You see, he says here, Zobrist is a proponent of the population apocalypse equation. This is Sienna talking to Robert now. Essentially, it's a mathematical recognition that the Earth's population is rising and are living longer, and our natural resources are waning. The equation predicts that the current trend can have no outcome other than the apocalyptic collapse of society. Zobrist has publicly predicted that the human race will not survive another century unless we have some kind of mass extinction event. Now, what actually inspired me to read this book was, I'm just checking, my notes are going strange, was the film. I watched the film. I watched that. Do you remember? I did a review of it but it had to be on Alt Tech because it was that review. It was that film called Expired Without Warning. So I can't give you its full title on YouTube. But in this film, Expired Without Warning, Tom Hanks is interviewed. Tom Hanks plays Robert Langdon in the film adaptation of this book, and he brings up this subject. It's a pretty. It says here, the Earth's population is rising, living longer, etc., etc. No outcome other than the apocalypse. Zobrist has predicted this, and he said the best thing that ever happened to Europe was the Black Death, because it decimated the population, thinned the herd, and led the way to a higher form of culture, in other words, the Renaissance. Yeah, so you're already getting the sense, I think, that Sienna has divided loyalties here, because she speaks sympathetically when she's discussing this. So when this is Sienna and Langdon having a private chat. Sienna Brooks, you see, she's pretty much making the same noises that Wilson made in Utopia. Do you remember in Utopia, Wilson starts sort of saying he's with them. They've got Kevin Christie as their prisoner, the heroes, but Wilson is sort of like saying basically he agrees with Christie. Yeah. So you probably guess now that the big bag of fluid, yellow-brown fluid, red in the film, is a bag of virus. It's a solution containing a virus, and he is going to release it. His plan is to release it. This is why he does this video. He's going to release it to the world media. He's in a secret place with this cave where no one knows where it is. Well, of course, the thing about it is the whole plot of the book is they're trying to find that cave. They're trying to find the cave where it is before he releases the virus. And Sienna and Langdon have this discussion while they're in Florence. This is just after Vienta has been killed. Vienta dies. Lyra, your thoughts? Sienna emerged slowly from her contemplations. I was thinking of Zobrist, trying to recall anything else I might know about him. And she shrugged. Most of what I know is from a controversial essay he wrote a few years ago. It really stayed with me. Amongst the medical community, it instantly went viral. Sorry, bad choice of words. His essay essentially declared that the human race was on the brink of extinction unless we had a catastrophic event that precipitously decreased the global population growth. Our species would not survive another 100 years. He predicted the time frame was substantially shorter than previous estimates, and he suggested that doctors should stop practicing medicine because it extended human lifespan and exacerbated the population problem. Zobrist was immediately attacked from all sides. Politicians, the WHO, all of whom said he was a doomsday lunatic. And they took particular umbrage at his statement that today's youth, if they chose to reproduce, would have offspring that literally would witness the end of the human race. Do you remember that scene? I showed it you when I talked about Utopia, and I can't remember which video it was. I think it was a live stream where there's that spooky scene where that woman is at the coach station and she's got that little kid with her and she's sitting beside this guy who's an agent of the depopulators. And he says, and she's saying, well, I like to do my bit for the environment by taking the coach rather than the plane. And he says, well, why did you have your kid then? Why did you have your kid? And he says, that little boy living a Western lifestyle will release this much CO2. His carbon footprint will be so big. The best thing you can do is slash his throat. And it was that spooky scene. Do you remember? And a look of compassion crosses her face. This is Sienna. It's really no wonder he snapped and killed himself. Yeah, because he kills himself at the beginning. Robert, speaking from a purely scientific standpoint, all logic, no heart, I can tell you without a doubt that without some kind of drastic change, the end of our species is coming. And it won't be fire or brimstone or nuclear war, it'll be total collapse, the number of people on the planet. The mathematics is indisputable. There you are, you're getting it. Langdon stiffened. I've studied a fair amount of biology. It's quite normal for a species to go extinct simply as a result of overpopulating environment. Picture a colony of surface algae living in a tiny pond, and he talks about then their food runs out and they die. What's that got? The guy who believes in peak oil. What's his name? Richard Heinberg. He said the same thing. Humans are like yeast. They consume the sugar and then they all die. Are humans more intelligent than yeast? A similar fate could await mankind. Langdon says, but that seems impossible. Not impossible, Robert, just unthinkable. The human mind has a primitive ego defense mechanism that negates all realities that produce too much stress for the brain to handle. It's called denial. And they then have this kind of argument. About this, and you get the first sense that Sienna's loyalties are divided. This is our brains say keep grandma alive as long as we can, and things like that. But then she says maybe we shouldn't, and it's this thing called Sienna says agathusia. What's it called? Agathanasia. There's this thing called agathanasia, which Zobrist proposes. This is that people should be killed when they reach a certain age. So basically, once you reach 70 or 80 years old, you know, because the human life expectancy is going so much that Zobrist says, well, and Sienna was talking about this with Robert, they should have agathanasia. Agathanasia means that, all right, you reach this age, then that's it, you die. And they kill you. It's really weird. Yeah, they mentioned Logan's Run, which is a very interesting. It's a book and also a really good film, actually. In Logan's Run, they said people should die at the age of 30 or something like that, which is so they have their own very extreme form of agathanasia. Yeah. And they go through this debate together, and they realise that this is probably what Zobrist is planning with this bag of fluid in this cave somewhere, which he's going to release on this particular date. And they've got to find it. They've got to find it before he releases it, basically. And Langdon, of course, wants very much to do this, and Sienna, of course, saved his life. You know, she busted him out of the hospital where Viantha was trying to kill him, or apparently trying to kill him. I'm giving away spoilers now, but nothing is ever as it seems in a Dan Brown novel. There's always like different ideas, and they're always different. Yeah. So you're getting the feeling that Sienna's loyalties are already divided. They meet a few other characters along the way who also are not who they seem to be. Now, the second part of the book, that is very, very different. I'll describe to you the movie version first of all. After a lot of toing and froing, going to Venice, thinking they're on the trail of where this cave is, they think it's in one of the cellars under Venice. They suddenly realise it's in Istanbul, and so they go to Istanbul. They realise that the Zobrist has chosen Istanbul because it's the Bosporus Strait, this point between Asia and Europe. Istanbul, this big city at the far southeastern corner of Europe, is kind of like the crossroads. It's described as the crossroads of the world, and indeed it was during the Black Death. A lot of the Black Plague during the Middle Ages, a lot of it came out of that area, Turkey and southeastern Europe, because that's where all the ships went between the Near East and Europe. And indeed, it's the same today. It's pretty similar today. Of course, the world's much bigger now. It also includes places like China. So that's why so they go there, and then they find, now in the film, they discover it's in this old cistern. Now, in Istanbul, there's a place you can actually visit it. It's called the Cistern. It's actually an underground reservoir, and it was built a long time ago. Sometime I think around about 1500 years ago. A lot of things in Istanbul are very old. For example, the Hagia Sophia Cathedral it's way older than the European cathedrals, like the Notre Dame. It's like built, I think, in the 3rd century. Magnificent structure. It's been like a mosque, or it's been both a mosque and a cathedral in its time. I think, again, we got this kind of like a weird sort of like, even when they're sort of running through the Hagia Sophia trying to find where this guy has left this doomsday device, this bag of fluid which is going to burst and infect the whole world with this virus. Robert is like going, he's looking up and gasping in wonder, and they're talking about the history of the Hagia Sophia. Oh, it was originally a mosque, and then it was turned into a church in the 5th century, and it became a mosque again, and then when Ataturk came along, etc., it became this and that. It's you think it's very American. Now, in the film, this scene in the film and the book is pretty much the same. They meet the curator of Hagia Sophia, a guy called Murat, who escorts them. And then they realise they're in the wrong place. It's actually this place called the Cistern. As I said, the Cistern is this 5th century reservoir where the city's fresh water was stored. They had a very, very highly developed water and sewage system in those days. Far better than anything we had here in Western Europe. And they realise that this Zabris must have hired the place out, because it turns out he funded some special concerts which were to be played. And guess what? They're called the Dante's Inferno concerts. There's this musical piece based on Dante, which I think is a real piece, and it's being performed by an orchestra in the Cistern for a whole week. And it was sponsored by a mysterious donor who paid for everything, including giving out free tickets. And they realised part of this sponsorship deal must have been the person who sponsored it must have said, this anonymous donor must have said, do you mind if I go and take a camera down and take a few pieces of equipment down into the cistern for a while and be on my own for a while? Oh, and by the way, I've got this costume, the plague doctor's costume, so we can make that little film and install this plaque and install this big bag of fluid, which is designed. It's made of something called solbulon, which is a plastic that degrades over time, and he's made it just the right thickness so he knows exactly when it's going to burst. I mean, in the film, it's like an explosive device. They've actually got in the film. What happens then is that they go down into the cistern. This is where the plots diverge very, very radically. They go down into the cistern. Sinski and her response team, this is led by a guy called Bruder. These are like the military, the WHO's military force. I don't know if that actually exists or not, but they have these kind of special forces units to do the WHO's work for them. Now, in the book, Sienna and a friend of hers, he's like this typical environmentalist hippie in the film. He doesn't exist in the book, this character. And he's kind of like, he's got long hair and denims. And he goes in there with her, and because they realise they're being followed by the WHO and Langdon and everyone. So they want to go in there and blow up the bag, and because they think they can't wait for the bag to rupture naturally, so they have to go in there and pop it basically. And they all run down into the cistern. There's these people playing. There's these concert goers, and there's people playing. There's a concert playing their instruments, and there's classical music everywhere. And they're running towards the bag, and Sienna's there, and because she's now gone renegade, she left Robert to be captured in Venice. And basically, what follows next is a pretty typical thriller finale. There's a big fight to try and Langdon and the others are trying to stop them, trying to get to the bag before she does. They got this big plastic box, and they put it. They managed to wrap the they get the bag inside this big plastic hermetically sealed perspex box, and they seal it, and they think, thank goodness for that, now it's safe. But then this explosive charge goes off, and there's this, because Sienna blows herself up, she kills herself detonating this bomb in the water to try and burst the bag, and they seal it just in time. But then there's this hippie guy, this long-haired denim-clad hippie, who jumps into the water and has a knife fight with Langdon, and eventually tries to open the box, and he almost does it. He gets one handle over, then the other, and then but then there's this big punch up, and eventually he gets shot by the Brooder, and Robert runs down and he grabs it, and he closes the seal just in time, because the bag inside is ruptured and everything's safe. Now in the book it's very different. In the book, Sienna is there, and she runs away, and Langdon runs after her, and eventually Sienna gives herself up and explains what she's done. But when they get to the right place, they find the plaque, but they don't find the bag of fluid. The bag of fluid has already popped. It popped a week ago. The date on the plaque is not the date that the bag will rupture, it turns out. It's the date that Zabrist calculates that the entire world will be infected with the virus. This virus, which is it's like the C word, it's airborne, popped a week earlier, and it went into the water. It became an aerosol. It went all over the world, and it's infected everyone. Now that doesn't happen in the film. You see, it's much more complicated and more interesting and more sinister, far more sinister in the book. Because what happens here? Because this is where it becomes totally different. Totally different. Everything is different in this book to the end. Firstly, the ending of the film, which was directed by Ron Howard. He's adapted all of Brown's books, novels, I think. He gives the story a very, very classic normal ending. I don't think Dan Brown would have approved of that. He obviously sold him the rights. But in the book, this is not only very different to the film, it's very different to anything Dan Brown's ever written before. Brooder stared down at the frayed relic of the transparent bag. It clung to the end of the tether like a tattered knot of a popped party balloon. None of the plastic was left, having all dissolved over the succeeding week. All that was left was a few pieces of tape, adhesive, which had attached it to its line. The truth settled slowly in his gut. We're too late. The submerged bag, dissolved, had broken apart, spilling its deadly contents into the water, bubbling up to the surface of the lagoon. With a tremulous finger, he flicked off his flashlight, trying to gather his thoughts. Those thoughts quickly turned into a prayer. God help us! And then, of course, the next scene is Langdon chasing after Sienna. But I mean, all the readers are thinking, "Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! What's happened?" And then there's a bit of science fiction here, because they have these things called PCR units, portable virus detection devices, which actually I don't think they exist. Actually, I think that's sci-fi. There is some sci-fi in Dan Brown's books, especially Angels and Demons. The PCR machines began analysing samples from every point on a hush fell across the cistern. On the machine closest to Brooder, a virus detection light began to flash red. His muscles tensed and his eyes shifted to the next machine. It began blinking red. No! Stunned murmurs reverberated through the cabin. Brooder watched in horror as one by one every PCR device began blinking red all the way across the cistern to the entrance. Oh God, he thought. The radius of contamination was enormous. The cistern was teeming with virus. Turns out the whole world is. And then Sienna gives herself up when Robert comes along. You waded into the water to break the Soluban bag. You wanted to release the Zabrist virus. Soluban bag, Robert. And this is where she confesses. She said she wanted to stop. She wanted to steal the virus herself. She wanted to destroy it. She wanted to stop the virus spreading, but she also wanted to stop the WHO getting it, because she was scared that they would weaponize it. Of course, governments do, don't they? They do that sort of thing. The virus was not going to be released until tomorrow. That's the date Zabris chose. If you hadn't gone into the water... Robert, I didn't release the virus. When I went into the water, I was trying to find it before it was too late. And then she says here, tonight was the closing night. The orchestra's been playing all week. The virus is already out there. It's been out there for a week. She says, it's a global saturation date, a mathematical projection of the date on which his virus will have propagated around the world and infected every individual. One problem, Sienna, said Robert. Why aren't people getting sick? If this plague's been out there a week, why aren't people dying? She turned back to him. Because Bertrand didn't create a plague to make people die. He created something far more dangerous. And... indeed, what he created, and it goes into details here, this vector virus, which of course is... the vector virus is a virus which doesn't just act like a normal virus by infecting your DNA, your cells, and using it to reproduce copies of itself. It actually alters the internal DNA of the cell, and of course, I can't say it on YouTube, but since this book was written in 2013, what kind of medical treatment has been suggested for a certain disease? Yep, and indeed this is designed to make most, he says 1/3 of people sterile. I mean, of course, Bertrand Zabris wants to make 1/3 of the population sterile with this virus. Of course, like Kevin Christie in Utopia wanted to make, I think it was 90% of people sterile. He wanted to, what he said, we will stop human reproduction for 3 generations. In the UK version and the Channel 4 version, we had that character, the actor, I forgot his name, the brilliant actor who said 10% will remain, 10% will remain fertile. What was it? And Kevin Christie puts it very well in the Amazon version of Utopia. The endless production line of human beings will finally grind to a halt. And then he talks about and then what happens next is, knowing that the virus is out there, the World Health Organization calls an international conference on how to deal with this, and there's this very strange series of discussions and dialogue, a very strange series of discussions between the characters. For example, Sinsky said, because someone suggests that they try to find an antidote for this virus, and she says, but of course there's a bigger issue. We might not want to counteract it. So again, eventually even the head of the WHO is like thinking, maybe we should use this as an opportunity, seeing as it's a fait accompli and it's already happened. The virus is already out there. It's making people infertile, so the population there, the birth rates will drop. Maybe rather than trying to stop this, we should simply plan for a future with fewer people. And that's kind of, and then what's the last bit? What's the last note I made here? That's it. So what we have here is a very, very, very strange book by Dan Brown. Very strange indeed. Extremely weird. Totally different. In some ways so similar to the Da Vinci Code, but in other ways so different to anything else he's ever written, morally, in terms of its ethics, in terms of its theme. Because, and of course so different from Ron Howard just made, I think Ron Howard probably let Dan Brown down. He probably let him down really by adapting the book into just a completely normal Dan Brown style thriller with a normal ending, normal themes, normal morals. When the book is so different. In the book, you're left at the end, and it surprised me. It bloody surprised me because I read the book before I saw the film. I really thought they'd just grab the bag and stop it just in time, like what happened in the film. They would get to the bag and seal it off. After a very tense kind of cliffhanger, they would eventually stop the virus escaping. But that's not what happened. I'm just going through my notes here. Yeah, there's an unresolved plot. Apparently, Sinsky suggests Langdon's infected with the disease on the plane. That could just be a mistake. Yep, the Who are the good guys. Yeah, like in World War Z. That's all. That's the notes I've got there. I don't need that now. So this, I think it would have been more interesting if Ron Howard had taken the time to make a film which was more in tune with the book's own actual theme, which I said it's far more interesting and far more sinister. But he didn't. He thought, "Oh, I'm just going to turn it into a normal Dan Brown thriller. What the hell? That's what the pro feed eating cinema reviewers want. That's what the critics will want." I get the sense that Dan Brown is sympathetic to the, as you guessed, especially from the motto at the beginning. The worst places in hell are for those who don't take action. Who maintain neutrality when and etc. And so the quote comes up later in the book, and it's attributed to somebody, not Dante, somebody else. But I get the sense that Dan Brown is sympathetic to the overpopulation cause. The overpopulation fear and the depopulation agenda, the necessity, which of course is quite mainstream. And I say necessity really in inverted quotes because, I hardly need to reiterate this because I've mentioned it so many times. The Earth is not overpopulated. It is not. Even if there are 7 billion of us now on the Earth. Now, I remember I had this debate with a 15-year-old girl from Hawaii in one of my early films. She put some comments underneath. This is years ago. I think I was talking about. I did a video long time ago. You can find it on my channel. Can you still see me? Yeah, you can. I'm sort of like quite low down in the frame, but you can see me. I said that the Earth is actually not overpopulated. It may look like that, especially if you live in the middle of a city. But I said, really, humans, firstly, in terms of the land space we occupy, if you put all the humans in the world into one giant city with the population of Macau, which is a special administrative region of China, it's a very densely populated city, how would it be? How big would 7 billion people in one big city with the population density of Macau be? The most densely populated city on Earth. You put them all in one big city that big, how big would it be? And people say probably hundreds of square miles, thousands. It would be like the size of. It may fit onto one continent. You know what I mean? The answer is it would be about the size of Northern Ireland. Surprisingly small. And then, of course, the overpopulation fearmonger will say, well, but Ben, it's not just the amount of space we occupy, it's the resources we consume, the carbon footprint we release, it's the food that the land needed to grow food to fill our bellies, it's the resources that have the fish that needs to be caught from the sea, and the trees that need to be cut down, and the pollution from the mines that produce equipment we use for our luxuries and things like that. And then you say, well, look, that's when we come on to the crux of the matter. The Earth appears to be overpopulated. One phrase I hear is, if you want to give everyone in the world a Western lifestyle and not let them... This is why you get this justification for deindustrialization and basically turning the entire planet into the third world. Right. If you want to give every single person in the world, an average middle-income Western lifestyle, fridge, freezer, computer, 2 cars, etc., you'd need 5 planet Earths. You can't do that. There's not enough resources in the world. Well, you see, this is where you come to the crux. The Earth appears to be overpopulated because of our lifestyle. Because essentially we are living in a way which wastes resources and creates pollution when methods are and especially generates energy. You know where I'm going with this. Generates energy in a way that damages the Earth's environment. If you could find a way to generate energy, for example, suppose, as I said, energy which can just be made out of nothing. Imagine you could just create energy out of nothing, without the need for fuel, without the need for bills to pay for it. Something that is safe, clean, extremely cheap, the generation is free, and could last forever. You would have a very different world. And as I've said many times, I've got an entire portal about this. That is possible, and it's being suppressed by the deep state. The situation that frightens these people so much, Dan Brown included, what frightens them so much. And I believe some of the people, probably some of the people lower down in the agenda to create the you know what arm ticket V word, I think that they have been fed this fear when they don't realise that the solution is not to reduce the population. The solution is to change our lifestyle, to declassify free energy. Once you declassify free energy, we can irrigate deserts to create as much farmland as we need. We could irrigate. You could just irrigate 1/4 of the Sahara Desert, and using hyper powerful fertilizers, natural non-polluting fertilizers like terra preta, which comes from the Amazon jungle. You could feed the world from just a patch of land in the Sahara Desert, irrigated by seawater that has been desalinated. There'd be enough food for everyone. There'd be enough energy. Of course, I know the Earth does have a finite carrying capacity. There's a limit to how many people you can actually have on the Earth. I know that, but if we use this technology in the post-Illuminati world, you'll find that we're nowhere near that carrying capacity yet. We're nowhere near it yet. So I think this book actually gives out quite a dangerous message. A dangerous message that's based on a delusion. It's pretty clear the author is expressing, I mean, unless he's very, very good at murdering his darlings, as creative writing teachers say. Either he's very good at that, or he is expressing his own fear. The fact that he has bought into this fear of overpopulation and sympathy for those who want to bring in some method of simply there being less people on the world, either by reducing fertility artificially among the population or perhaps more radical means. You can see I'll show you that. You can pause and read that. There's the spine, there's the back, you can see where I've been making notes there. And that's really all I can say, I think, until we come onto the live stream. But I'll just run through some reviews of from the media of this. Okay, so let's look at what the critics are saying. The critics. Yes, we have to have the critics, don't we? Now, I don't often do these for these watch parties, but I'm going to in this occasion. Inferno, we're going to first start with The Guardian. Review by Dan Brown. Sorry, Inferno by Dan Brown. Review. This is by Peter Conrad. Infernal prose flows again from the bat-thronged belfry of Dan Brown's demented brain. Oh my God. How many stars is he going to give it? I used to think that Dan Brown was merely bad. Now, after reading the latest version of the apocalyptic thriller he rewrites every few years, I suspect he may be mad as well. He gives a basic outline of the plot. Yeah, the Da Vinci Code unveiled a heresy that was intended to capsize Christianity. In Inferno, Brown punishes the pollution of our self-destructive species by threatening to unleash a plague. In his neo-medieval imagination, a new strain of the Black Death is a surer way to control our numbers than rubbering up before sex. Oh God, he's like... I think he said... balmy as it is, I'm also relieved to report that Inferno is also dreadful, abounding in malapropisms and solecisms, I don't know what these things mean, leaden restatements, I suppose there are restatements in it, and obvious naive disinformation about the reality outside the bat-thronged belfry that is Brown's head. He's already said that. Yeah, words flatline. Now he talks about things like... he talks about like he talks about the history, like I said, the touristy element to it, the kind of like travel literature feel to it, which is not really quite what you'd expect. Yeah. The man who hallucinated this nonsense would be a harmless crank if he didn't have such a loyal, furtive following. Like a demagogue, Brown panders to a mass mind with its cravings for myths and monsters and preys on its credulity by claiming that of pseudoscience and muddled art history of his novels are real. As if to prove a point, he actually adds people, his publisher, who had a precious NetJets Corporation cards, and a Florentine Museum official to his otherwise phantasmagoric cast. The mixture is not fiction, but an intellectual fraud. Oh, it's just a story, mate. Art at its best is a lie that tells the truth. At its worst, as in Dan Brown's infernal Inferno, it's a lie that expunges the truth and replaces reality with its own demented murk and noxious malarkey. Oh God, right. So I think I'll buy this guy a copy for Christmas. I think. But you know, I mean, the guy. I mean, I'd expect him to see it at a very low, naive level. The left, sort of intelligentsia left, are very anti this sort of thing because they're very anti the overpopulation myth. But not for the same reason that I am. They say things like, "Oh, it's all something made up by Western white patriarchal males, and it's to attack the third world, to attack innocent brown people who are just victims of colonialism for having too many babies and things like that." So you would expect that from the Guardian because they don't like this. This author has probably detected the same sympathies that I did. The author has for the overpopulation situation, and he has rejected it viscerally in the same way I did. But the philosophy behind his opposition to overpopulation myth is very different to my own. Now let's look at the Times of India, and of course I'll do the usual accent for that. The Times of India says, yeah, on the occasion of the release of its trailer, I thought of revisiting the original book. Yes, as you may have noticed, Dan Brown's Inferno is being converted to a movie and is soon going to be a hit in the theatres. But as much as I'm excited and impressed by the movie trailer, the book wasn't the same case. Dan Brown is one of these authors whose book release is nothing less of an event. You would see people queuing up for his book on the day of its release, just like people would queue for a new Apple product. The author brings out his book after taking an awfully long time on it, and when he finally does, the pre-orders rush you like a tsunami. When Inferno had released, I was one of those who had marked my calendars and rushed to the nearest store to buy the book, kind of failed to quench the expectations I had from the book. For one as akin to Dan Brown's books, Inferno too had come with a truckload of information and anecdotes, and the places mentioned in the book. This time the star of the book was Dante and Florence, along with other places, and somehow in mentioning and getting his readers acquainted with the history and trivia, the main track keeps dwindling. And that is the major trouble with the book. That is the hold on its main plot is very weak, but at the same time the book is a treasure house for background information, though a little depth in the plot would have been more appreciable rather than the lukewarm treatment it got this time. I actually think that's a fair comment. The idea that it has trouble maintaining the plot, it does. I think it's as I say, it's too similar to the Da Vinci Code. I'm talking now about basically the first 2/3 of the book. As I said, the last act of the book really is far, far more interesting and sinister, as I said. The first bit, though, is just too much like the Da Vinci Code. It's very derivative. And, as I said, it's not realistic for the people to be fleeing from evil, spiky-haired girls with guns, and at the same time stopping to admire the paintings in the corridor that crosses the bridge, which is an art gallery too, things like that. And he goes, and Langdon says to Sienna, "Yeah, this was created in 1568 so that the Doge could get from one place to the other," things like that. Again, it's so I think I understand what this guy's saying. This particular reviewer, he's really doing it. He is. Merrill Anlil, his name is. All said, Inferno is still a Dan Brown book, and even in his average performance, Dan Brown's book could give competition to any book out there. Yes, it does not ignite the fire as much as the Da Vinci Code or Angels and Demons. I would say it certainly is nowhere. It doesn't ignite the fire like Da Vinci Code. It's nowhere near as good. And Angels and Demons, I thought was lousy. It was a bloody awful book, and the film was even worse. But I still would say it definitely gets you travelling through Florence and other places like an informative and talkative tour guide. Yes, that's what it's like. I think, why not just make it? He'd be great writing a piece of travel literature, Dan Brown, rather than writing a thriller. That's a very perceptive way of putting it. The movie trailer, on the other hand, seems to be very energetic and spiced up version of the book, and definitely looks promising. In short, the spark is less in Inferno, and it tends to be more of a travelogue, as the main plot has a very lukewarm treatment. But it still is a Dan Brown book, and definitely makes up for the time you devote to it, provided you do not have huge expectations. Right, so this Times of India reviewer thinks a lot more of the book than The Guardian did. Which I think he's probably more fair than the guy in The Guardian. But as I said, he possibly doesn't have the ideological commitment in the same way that The Guardian reader does, probably because of his cultural background, because he's Indian, not British. Therefore, an Indian author would not have the terrible colonial white male guilt that the Guardian author would, and I think that's possibly why he read the book. And indeed, its theme at the end, this very radical and rather creepy theme at the end, with slightly less cynicism. And that was my watch party review of the book Inferno by Dan Brown, and the film Inferno, based on the book by Dan Brown, directed by Ron Howard. The next step is the live stream, which I will arrange as soon as possible. Keep watching the Panmo Radio, the Panmo TV blog for notices. I'll also insert a link to the live stream into the notice for this film as well. So we'll get that done as soon as possible. Hope you can join me in the live chat. As always, there will also be a video notice posted on the Ben the Jail Porter YouTube channel, so that you can join in with the live stream when it comes, about 24 hours beforehand. Thank you for watching Panmo TV. Hospital Porters, pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order.